So, over the last week or so, I've been paying a lot of attention to the reviews, previews, and all the chatter around Evil West. Mainly because I saw the trailers a few months back and I thought it looked cool. In general, I suppose it just looked like the type of thing that I'm usually into, which is kind of essentially cool action, not too long, 8 to 12 hour campaign, flashy, short and sweet. So, as I said, paying attention to all of the chatter around the game since its release. And I feel like I sort of had a epiphany, although that might epiphany might be too grand of a description. A mini epiphany, let's go with a very small realization. Something that I noticed in general with the reviews and sort of how this game is being described and talked about, and really, even though I'm sure I'll probably use a Evil West thumbnail and Evil West footage for this video, it is about Evil West, but it's not really about Evil West. It's more kind of what I realized looking at Evil West. So if you're unaware, Evil West is basically a third-person action game, which is cowboys versus vampires. That's the basic premise. So the reviews for Evil West at the moment, and I know Metacritic isn't gospel, it's currently at 69, which is, fine. It's just below that mark where the number would turn green and look positive, but 69 is okay. It's mixed, leaning towards positive. And a lot of the reviews are kind of talking about it, saying, it looks nice, got a cool setting, it has really fun gameplay and combat, but towards the end it's a little repetitive, but towards the end it gets a little stale, or maybe it just needs a little extra zhuzh. I don't even know if that's a word, but it needs something extra to get it across that line into making it great or spectacular, which is fine. I mean, I haven't played the game, obviously, so I'm not here to disagree with anybody who has reviewed the game, and I can see elements of what they're saying just in the footage, because this isn't a massive AAA big budget thing. It looks like what I used to refer to as like a B tier game, and I don't mean that as a derogatory term. When I say a B tier game, I hope you know what I mean. I kind of mean at the same level as something like a Singularity. Singularity is the perfect example, and I'll mention more examples as we go on. The reviews aren't fantastic, but they are good enough to say that the people who made this game did a pretty good job. And the realization that I had when, listening to all this and reading all of this review stuff, it kind of couples up with something that I've thought about for quite some time, really, in that I feel like this industry is missing that B tier of games a bit, because for the most part, there are the big budget flashy games, and you probably get 3 to 4 of those a year max. There's not a lot of like those unlimited budget, the examples I'm giving here are very much in the vein of like God of War, Modern Warfare 2, but those are very few and far in between. And what I feel like we used to have a lot more of, and this is me getting back on my old man stuff again, but what we used to have a lot more of during the PS2, original Xbox, and PS3 and 360 era is a real healthy B tier of stuff that makes up the bulk of your year. I mean, if you're someone like me, anyway, who plays a lot of games, if you're someone like me who's playing a lot of stuff, not all of your games are going to be those real top tier, out of this world, oh my god, this looks amazing. They're not all going to be that. Those are very few and far. I know people pick up consoles specifically for those games, the GTAs and the Call of Duties and all that, but they are very few and far in between. And what makes up the majority of your gaming experience throughout the years is that B tier. And so I'm looking at the reviews for Evil West, and I'm seeing the general gist of the reviews for Evil West that I'm seeing basically say, this is cool, this is cool, this is cool, but it gets a little repetitive, but it just doesn't quite get across the line into something that could be considered a great game. However, back in the day, I feel like these games would get greenlighted a lot more, and I feel like this would 100% get a patch, and most likely get a sequel, which means gives the developers an opportunity to look at what they did before, look at how people responded to it, and go, okay, here's where we're going to make some changes. And from that, you make a much better game that builds on, what came before. And so I suppose the epiphany and realization and whatever is basically me saying, I feel like there's a lot less games that are made nowadays because somebody said, do you know what would be cool? And then we go from there. For Evil West, I could be 100% wrong, and I'm always willing to. If somebody has any proof or evidence otherwise, feel free to let me know. I'm perfectly happy to be wrong. But Evil West looks like a game where somebody said, do you know what would be cool? And then the development process started. They thought cowboys versus vampires, late, sort of 18th century, that whole they thought that was going to be cool. And they went ahead and made that game, and it looks like they did a pretty good job, although the reviews aren't stellar. But now we're kind of in this point with the games industry where it has become so huge and so successful that there is a lot more money being pumped into this industry than there used to be. The more money you have being pumped in basically means that everything is now a risk. Everything is, we have to make our money back. We're not trying to build a library of great titles anymore. We're trying to get one or two absolute Minecraft, Fortnite level bangers. And I completely understand the idea of, if we're going to put hundreds of millions or, anywhere close to 100 million into something, we want to make sure that we get our money back. And now, Evil West 2, or the idea of an Evil West 2, isn't necessarily a safe and bankable bet. And I hope you understand kind of where I'm going with this train of thought, in that it feels like, instead of people making games going, oh, do you know what would be cool if we made this, it's sort of like shifted in a way where now people are saying, okay, we want to make one of those, but we want to put our spin on it. So whether it's live, I have lost count of how many online multiplayer hero shooter battle pass live service, like that whole thing, whether it's Overwatch or Call of Duty is borderline on that side, Rainbow Six, and like all of this, sell people skins and that whole thing. And I'm not knocking it. I'm not saying those games aren't fun. I've had a lot of fun with some of the games in that genre. When you're bringing your money to the table, obviously you're going to want to make sure that you're going to do the best job that you possibly can to make sure it's a safe bet and you can retain or make back as much money as possible. But we used to have, a lot more variety and creativity because the industry was trying to find its feet, was trying to find what works. And while it was trying to find what works, everybody was just making whatever it is that they wanted. And a lot of this stuff would get a pass and it would go on to have sequels and could develop into, pretty big franchises. And now we've entered this era where we make games based on, sort of safe bets. I don't want to say I'm concerned or I'm going to stop playing games, or because that's a bit dramatic. I just feel like it's a bit of a shame, really, that we've kind of lost. It feels like we've lost that element. I can't help but think back to previous years in the industry where that B tier that I mentioned seemed to be doing quite well, and there were more sort of things that were getting a chance, getting an opportunity. So as I already mentioned, when I used the example of Singularity as a B tier game, that Singularity doesn't feel like, to me, that's getting made today. Do you know what's an even better example of what I'm talking about here? And this isn't a B tier game. This was a AAA game. Its original release was getting quite similar reviews in tone, not necessarily in score, but in tone to Evil West, which was, this is good, this is good, this is good, but it gets quite repetitive. And that game is Assassin's Creed. And that first one, in my opinion, was like a good 7 out of 10, 8 out of 10 kind of game. But they got another opportunity. And then they made Assassin's Creed 2, which a lot of people hold up as arguably the peak in the series. Another great example of that would be something like Titanfall. Didn't quite hit the nail on the head, but it got another opportunity. Titanfall 2 is for me, my favourite first-person shooter campaign of the last generation. I kind of wonder if games like that would get made today because people are putting so much money in it. It is such high risk. Another great example, actually, would be Bully. Rockstar might decide to make a Bully sequel, but that's only because Bully originally, has set the foundation, and it is now a big enough name for them to make a sequel and generate interest. And to be fair, I suppose you could argue that Rockstar can make whatever they want and people will flock to it because they're Rockstar. But if somebody was to propose Bully today, I don't know if that gets made. The closest comparison you could make today to a new sort of like version of Bully is probably that Harry Potter game that's about to come out, where you're essentially a student going from class to class and getting into all sorts of stuff outside of school time. And the only reason that's getting made is because it's a Harry Potter game. If Harry Potter is not attached to that game, that game is not happening. I sat here for a little this morning and sort of thought, oh, what's some of the big stuff that wouldn't get made today? I mean, does the entirety of the EA Sports big catalogue get made today? With SSX and Def Jam Vendetta and FIFA and NFL Street and NBA Street, does all of that get made today? Does stuff like Red Faction get made today? Does stuff like Freedom Fighters get made today? Does stuff like Max Payne get made today? Vanquish, Enslaved, Condemned, True Crime, like... And I know True Crime wasn't perfect. I reviewed it myself a few years back and gave it like 3 stars out of 5. But it has cool ideas. Does Mirror's Edge get made today? Mirror's Edge is a great example because they made the first one, delayed that sequel for so long, and then they made a second one, which was... It was open world, and I personally think it was worse than the first one. They made that game after everybody shouted at EA for like a decade. And it came out and it didn't knock things out of the park. It wasn't, an absolute banger hit. There's very similar to the way Skate is coming back now. But they made that Mirror's Edge sequel, and it didn't knock it out of the park. It didn't win any Game of the Year awards. And then, okay, that franchise is dead. Similar to Skate, people have been hashtagging EA for... I can't remember when Skate 3 came out. I want to say somewhere in the range of like 2010, 2012, somewhere like that. Again, they have been shouting at EA to make another Skate game because, Skate was a cool series. It took the skateboarding genre, added this kind of weird, wacky, sort of like ragdoll physics, but the tricks are kind of hard to pull off, so everything is, if you do pull something off, it's quite impressive. They have been shouting at EA to make a Skate sequel forever, and EA caved, and they said, okay, you want a Skate sequel? We're going to give you a Skate sequel. And that Skate sequel now it's going to be a free-to-play, microtransactions, buy skins. You're probably going to have to pay, £2 to change the colours of your wheels. It's going to be a live service game. It's not going to be probably the Skate game that the people shouting at them for a decade wanted. I think what I'm saying in general is my epiphany is that I hope they get to make an Evil West 2 one day, because it seems like a cool game, but I highly doubt that they will, because somebody at the top of an organisation is going to say, oh, we can't afford to sink that much money into a sequel based on how the first one went, when there were a lot of games that didn't review spectacularly back in the day that got a second chance, and they went on to not only score 9s and 10s with the sequels, but build huge franchises that people are profiting off today. So I hope that makes sense. Essentially, what I'm saying. And yeah, that's going to be it for this one. So as always, I've been an Epsayan. You've been a wonderful audience, and I hope to catch you next time.